This is Bernard Hopkins. He was a world champ in boxing in 2 different weight classes, had a very successful career. And today we're going to use him at the end of our lesson to talk about how we can provide marginal value in the workplace. Hi, this is Jeff Goldfinger. Welcome to the STEM Signal. This is the channel where we help the STEM educated increase their career signal among the workplace noise. Today's lesson is on marginal utility and marginal value. But before we get started, I have to do a quick review from last week's lesson. The link is in the description below. It was on risk versus reward and the fact that all humans are essentially divided into 2 categories: risk seekers, risk avoiders. I'm not going to go into how we know that, but I do want to point out 3 areas in the brain that are involved in this risk versus reward decision, because we're going to reuse those areas for today's lesson. Okay, so in the middle of the brain, you see something labeled on this as AMG. That's the amygdala. The amygdala is our fear center and pumps out epinephrine and adrenaline when we have a fear factor. The other area we talked about was dopamine, the reward center. Here it's indicated by the nucleus accumbens in the ventral tegmental area. Another name for it is the ventral striatum, the VSTR. Don't worry about these acronyms, etc. Just know that they're essentially 2 different sets of circuitry in the brain, one for reward, one for fear. Then those signals wind up going to that blue shaded area called the PFC, where they get measured one against the other to determine your risk preference. Well, that same measuring occurs when we're buying something. Well, why are we talking about buying when we're talking about increasing our STEM signal, our career signal in the workplace? So for that, I turn to Scottish novelist Robert Louis Stevenson, who says, "Everyone lives by selling something." So what are we selling in the marketplace? We're selling our identity. That's what the STEM Signal channel is all about. We're selling our identity to our peers, superiors, and subordinates. That's how we increase our career signal. So if we're selling our identity, we have to understand what our peers, superiors, and subordinates are buying. And for that, we need to understand how the brain determines what to buy. So neuroscience and behavioral economists have been looking into what part of the brain actually does the buying and what is the model it uses to make a buying decision. And they came up with this notion of the utility maximization model. This notion that we are always looking for marginal utilities and we buy based on those marginal utilities. Again, the dopamine center, the ventral striatum in the center there, is that the buy button. And there's a whole research article, you can look this one up, that talks about this buying signal. But at the end of the day, what the economists refer to as the principle of marginal utility says that we humans are always buying on the margins. We look at the utility of an object, a product, or a service, and we look for that marginal utility that we are willing to pay extra for. So let's use a practical example. Let's talk about white bread, right? So what's the utility of white bread? It provides nourishment and it can help us make a sandwich that we can hold in our 2 hands without getting dirty from the actual meat and vegetables and sauces we put on the sandwich. So that's its utility. If there's nothing more, it has no marginal utility. If it's just merely white bread, then it just has utility and gets priced like a commodity. In other words, the lowest price wins. So in your career, if you just have utility, you're going to be priced like a commodity and you're going to be paid the lowest salary the company can afford to hire you at. Now let's contrast that with bread that has marginal utilities. In this case, we have some nut bread or wheat bread or pita bread. In each of those cases, the manufacturer of the bread has looked at creating a little marginal utility that a customer may want to pay an extra 1 to 2 cents per slice at. It's not much, but it's what the customer is looking for. Now, sometimes you can get absurd with this notion of marginal utility and you wind up with a full aisle worth of breads that are all in this ultimate fight for marginal utility, in which case your brain gets overwhelmed and you tend to just go straight to the bread you always know. But that's an absurd case, right? Normally, our brains are willing to pay for a little extra marginal utility if we see value in it. So now let's talk about how to value this marginal utility. All right, I'm going to use the case of basketball as my example to explain this. In this case, we have Steph Curry, a very famous player for the Golden State Warriors in the U.S. state of California, a championship team. And Steph Curry is well known as a marquee player in the league. All other stats aside, let's just pick one statistic that we can examine for marginal utility, and we'll call that points per game per player. So there's a league-wide average of points per game per player, whether you're a bench warmer or a marquee player like Steph Curry. At the time I was looking up this data, the league-wide average was 7.8 points. Well, what's Steph Curry's average? Again, at the time I got the data, his career average was 22 points, 3 times the league average. So he obviously has a lot of marginal utility. So now the question is, how does he calculate the value of that? If let's say you're a 10-point per game player, so you're pita bread or nut bread, and you go into the owner of the Golden State Warriors and say, look, I'm a 10-point per game player, I'm 2 points above the league-wide average, and the owner says, yeah, that's fine, I'll give you a small 5% or 10% premium on top of the league-wide average salary. Okay, got it. Little bit of marginal utility, little bit of extra value, you increase your salary. Great. Now, what about Steph Curry's agent? He goes into the owner and says to her, by the way, I don't know whether it's a he or a she of the Golden State Warriors, so disregard that for the accuracy of that statement for a moment, that pronoun. But let's assume he goes into the Golden State Warriors owner and says to her, hey, Steph scored 30 points per game on average last season. I want to renegotiate his contract, and he is worth $21 million. And she goes, where did you get that figure? So he says, well, here's the deal. Steph Curry, by keeping him on the team, you're going to increase your TV contracts by X%. You're going to put Y% more butts and seats in the stadium. You're going to sell more stuff in the kiosks. You're going to be able to increase the price of your VIP booths. So he goes down the list and describes with precision the value that he believes Steph Curry is worth for his marginal utility. So now it's not a discussion where the owner decides what the premium is. It's the owner now can just negotiate a few percentage points here and there, but Steph Curry and his manager have already done the calculation of what his marginal utility is worth. And what I'm trying to hint to you is that's what you need to do to increase your STEM signal, is learn to be able to calculate the value of your marginal utilities. We'll talk about that again at the end of this presentation. All right, so that's a monetary value for marginal utility. Let's talk about a different type of value. And in this case, we have a pharmacist. And so what is the marginal value of a pharmacy? So on your way to work, your spouse calls you up and says, hey, don't forget to pick up your prescription before you come home. Now, when do you go to pick up your prescription? Does anybody do it on the way into work? No, they do it on the way home from work. So which pharmacy do you go to for your prescriptions? Is it about the cost? No, that's not the value you put on getting your prescription, because most of the time the cost is only marginally different between one pharmacy over another. Instead, what you do is you find the pharmacy that is most convenient to you, the one that's easiest to navigate to on your way home from work. In my case, it was a CVS, or it could be a Walgreens if you're in the US, or wherever it is. You pick your pharmacy by convenience. Here in Spain, it's the one that's right across the street from us. All right, so you can value marginal utility with a monetary number or a convenience or some other criteria, some other metric you might have. All right, now let's look at one final case about marginal utility. So for those of you who like red apples, let's use the example of red apples, which I do. So what marginal utility am I looking for when I buy red apples? I walk into the store and I see all these apples. Which one do I pick? I pick the shiniest one. Why? Because evolutionary biology has trained us to recognize healthy foods, healthy looking foods. And in the case of fruit, it's the fruit on the tree that looked the healthiest. Now, the grocery stores know this about our evolutionary biology, and that's why they use wax to wax the apples to make them look healthier than they otherwise may have looked. All right, so in any case, I go into the store and I see this rack of apples. Which apple do I pick? Do I literally go through every single apple to find the one with the most marginal utility, in this case, the shiniest, healthiest looking? No, it's not worth my time. There is no value to me standing there for a half an hour examining every single apple. So what I typically do is just look on the top row and my eyes will hone in on maybe a corner and okay, that one, those two look good. Again, evolutionary biology kicks in. When we were on the savanna plains in Africa and we saw the apple tree, we didn't go climb the apple tree and examine every apple. No, we were being chased by lions and tigers and bears, so we didn't have a lot of time. So what we did was we looked at the low-hanging fruit and grabbed the shiniest apple we saw that was within our reach. All right, but let's use a hypothetical example in the extreme. And let's say we did spend a half an hour or an hour examining every single apple, and we pick out the one that is the healthiest, and we walk up to the counter and we say, here, I'd like to buy this apple. And the cashier says to us, hey, Goldie, you found it. You found the apple with the most marginal utility. I got to charge you an extra quarter. Do they do that? No. There is no value to having the shiniest apple. We price all the apples the same. It's just the person who gets there earlier to pick out the good apples gets to take them home, but everybody pays the same price. So why do I bring that up? Beware of the shiny apple. Beware of marginal utilities you think you have that nobody values. That's the thing to be aware of. All right, so I'm talking about value. What's our framework for calculating value? So here's one that you can, I'm going to slowly march through these. So if you want to take out a piece of paper, you can do that or pause the screen. So let's talk about something that's merely valued. So something that's valued meets the requirements of your concern. It uses common skills and resources. It matches market norms, and it takes care of a task that you need done. As an example of that, here's the Jethro 4G bar phone for seniors. That's their marketing words, not mine, okay? All right, so here we have a phone that meets the requirements of this senior using common components and common architecture. It matches market norms for seniors, and it focuses on the task at hand, which is being able to call their loved ones and friends, okay? All right, let's contrast that with something that's marginally valued. And in this case, marginally valued might be a Samsung Galaxy phone, where it exceeds the requirements by offering smartphone features. So it uses some uncommon skills and resources, in this case, a sophisticated camera system on the back that exceeds market norms and allows you to focus on larger tactical considerations that may create new opportunities for you. Again, a smartphone, the new opportunities is you can look at email, you can play music, you can surf the web, etc. Okay? All right, now let's look at a highly valued offer. A highly valued offer vastly exceeds requirements using scarce and sought after skills and resources. This is Steph Curry here. He sets new market norms, new standards in the marketplace for 30 points a game or a lifetime 22 points per game, which allows you to think about different strategies for your team. Instead of focusing merely on winning a single game, you now have a much larger strategy that takes you all the way to the playoffs, which reveals unexpected opportunities and outsized returns. So an example of that might be the highly valued iPhone 14, or maybe a Tesla Plaid Model S, or a Bentley, or a Rolls Royce. Those are highly valued offers. Now, the thing to be aware of is not everybody can afford highly valued offers. So you might have some highly valued marginal utilities, but if you're selling them to somebody who can only afford marginally valued skills, you're in the wrong market. So understand that your marginal value has to match what your customer can afford. Not everybody can afford an iPhone 14, and that's why Samsung and others are out there at a lower price point. Although they keep trying to compete with Apple, they never get into that stratosphere. When you buy an iPhone, you buy into the Apple ecosystem, which allows you to connect to your watch and your Apple computer and other devices as part of the Apple ecosystem. All right, so that brings us back to our Bernard Hopkins quote: if you don't know your own value, somebody will tell you your value, and it'll be less than your worth. And that's the point, which is a great quote. It's your obligation to figure out what your marginal utilities are and then understand how they will be valued in the marketplace. So as we finish up this lesson, I want you to think about, as a linguistic gym, do a little exercise for yourself. What are your marginal utilities? And you should list them in one of two ways: your technical utilities, your degrees, your certifications, the projects you've been able to complete, and your social marginal utilities. Are you a leader? Are you a follower? Are you a good leader? Are you a good follower? Do you have social power? Do people listen to you in the workplace? Are you able to persuade people? Those are your marginal utilities, technical and social, that you should think about when you've come up with your value. So now the question is, are they valued by your peers, superiors, and subordinates? And how would you know that? Well, you ask them. In some places there's formal annual performance reviews. You can find out there what they really value. But in any case, you need to understand in your marketplace what's merely valued from marginally valued or highly valued. And make sure you let go of your shiny apples, okay? The things that you know you can do, but that have no value in the marketplace. If you found this content valuable, please like and subscribe. Of course, that helps the YouTube algorithm. It also helps you stay up to date on our weekly postings. But to increase your STEM signal, as I've always said, I encourage you to share this with others. Send them a link, talk about it in the workplace. That'll help increase your social power, as we talked about today. All right, thank you very much. And until next week, keep your STEM signal above the noise.